The drawer beneath Nora Bell's flower table was so heavy with coins that the plank bowed in the middle. She counted the money once. Then she counted it again. Outside, 12 railroad bridge men stood under her porch lanterns, with empty sacks in their hands, waiting to claim tomorrow morning's bread before any other crew could get to it. Inside, her husband Jonas stood in the parlor arch, with his hat crushed between both hands. For a long while, he could not speak. Not because the room was quiet. The room was full of sound. Bread cooling on racks, rain ticking on the roof, silver sliding under Nora's thumb, and outside, men calling to each other in the dark, arguing over whether she would have any onion loaves left by sunrise. Jonas looked at the drawer. Then he looked at the supper Nora had forgotten on the stove. Then he looked at the woman he had once told to stop embarrassing him before the whole county knew he could not provide. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because there are apologies a man can say easily, and there are apologies that have to climb out from under every foolish thing he has ever believed. Nora did not rescue him. She only folded the bills flat, set the coins in piles of 10, and waited. 8 months earlier, on the westbound train into New Mexico territory, Nora had sat beside a woman with a black bonnet, a carpet bag full of needles, and eyes sharp enough to cut thread. The woman watched Nora smooth the same blue traveling dress for the third time. "Bride?" she asked. Nora smiled politely. "So I am told." "Ranch wife?" "So I am told." The woman gave a dry little laugh, but not a cruel one. "Then remember this, child. A house can look proper and still go hungry. Out here, paint is not a meal. Curtains are not credit. A front room only matters if something behind it works." Nora glanced at her own hands, clean and soft from a life that had not stayed as safe as it looked. "My husband says a good home gives a man standing." "It does," the woman said. "But standing is not sitting. Do not let them build you a room so fine you cannot walk out of it." At the time, Nora thought it was only train talk, a stranger's warning. One of those hard little sayings people carry west because they have already buried the softer ones. Then Jonas Bell met her at Arroyo Switch with a borrowed wagon, a tired horse, and a collar too stiff for his neck. He was not unkind. That surprised her. He was younger than the photograph his cousin had sent. Sun-browned, narrow through the shoulders, with a careful way of speaking that made every sentence sound weighed before it was spent. But she knew trouble before he opened his mouth. Trouble has a smell. Old rope, thin hay, paint laid over wood too rotten to hold it. The Bell Ranch sat 3 miles beyond town, near the freight road that ran beside the new railroad grade. The line had not reached the upper canyon yet, but crews were already living in camps up the wash, building trestles, blasting rock, and sleeping under canvas through weather no sensible animal would tolerate. All along the drive, Nora saw what Jonas did not point at. A north fence sagging low enough for cattle to think about leaving. A barn roof patched in one corner and failing in 3. A windmill that turned only when the wind felt charitable. A pasture too tired to be called pasture. Jonas talked instead about the house. He had whitewashed the porch. He had bought a little parlor stove second-hand from a family moving east. He had ordered lace curtains from a catalog and hung them before her arrival so she would not feel she had married down into a wilderness. "My mother kept a clean front room in Missouri," he said, eyes fixed on the road. Folks remembered it. They knew she was not common. Nora looked at the dust in the wagon bed and the patched harness on the horse. And that mattered to her? It mattered to everyone. When the house appeared, it looked as if a poor man had forced it to wear Sunday clothes. The porch was swept. The windows shone. The front yard had been laid out in pale crushed stone, 2 curved beds of imported gravel, 4 brittle rose bushes trying not to die, and a painted iron bench facing the road as if callers might arrive any minute with gloves on. A blue glass gazing ball stood in the center of it all. It reflected the sky beautifully. It fed nothing. Inside, the parlor was the finest room. New paper on the walls, a braided rug. The second-hand stove polished black, the lace curtains fluttering from open windows like little flags of hope. The kitchen behind it told the truth: one sack of meal, half a side of salt pork, coffee stretched with roasted barley, 3 hens in the yard, offended by life, and laying whenever it pleased them. And on the shelf beside the stove, under a cracked blue plate, Nora saw a folded stack of bills. Jonas saw her see it. He moved too quickly, picking up the plate and sliding the papers behind a tin. "It has been a dry year," he said. Nora said nothing. A woman learns a great deal from the thing a man hides first. That first evening, Jonas showed her the parlor twice. He stood near the lace curtains like a boy waiting to be praised for a lesson. "You can sit here in the afternoons," he said. "When neighbors come, you will receive them proper. Coffee on the small table. I thought maybe flowers in that jar." Nora looked past him through the front window. Beyond the pale stone yard and the useless blue ball, the freight road cut through the dust. Wagons passed there, teamsters, railmen, cooks, surveyors, mule drivers, men far from supper carrying wages and hunger in the same pockets. She thought of the woman on the train. A front room only matters if something behind it works. "It is a handsome room," Nora said. Jonas smiled with such relief that she almost could not bear what she was already thinking, because the house had a parlor, but the road had customers, and under all that pretty stone, if the ground was what it looked like, the ranch had a chance. The first bill came 4 days later. Mr. Cole's mercantile sent it by a boy with freckles and the nervous loyalty of someone employed by a dangerous man. Jonas read it on the porch. Nora watched his face close around the number. He folded the paper into a square so small it might vanish. "Usual account," he said. That night, after Jonas slept, Nora found the others. Feed, lumber, nails. Seed oats bought on credit, and never planted because the irrigation ditch had silted up. A note from the bank, written so politely, it was almost obscene. She added the figures by lamplight. Then she added them again, because poverty always looks larger the second time. By dawn, she knew the Bell Ranch was not poor in the way people brag about surviving. It was poor in the way that has already chosen what it will take first. The barn, then the cows, then the house, then the name Jonas had tried so hard to polish. At breakfast, she set a cup in front of him and said, "The yard is wrong." Jonas blinked. "The yard? Y'all that stone, the gravel beds, that glass ball? It is tidy. It is thirsty. That is why I put stone. It takes work and gives nothing back." His face changed, not anger first. Fear, the particular fear of a man hearing a private weakness named aloud. "It tells people we are settled," he said. "No, it tells people we are pretending to be." He set down his coffee. Nora softened her voice, but not the truth. "The soil under that stone is dark. I checked it yesterday near the fence where the runoff settles. If we clear half the front yard and run a small cut from the ditch, we could grow onions, beans, squash, chilies, enough for ourselves more, if the rows take. We are not market people. We are hungry people. We are not hungry, the shelves are." He looked away. She let that land. Then she pointed through the window. "Those railroad camps are full of men eating bad bacon and worse bread. They pass our gate every day. The cooks in those camps would pay for greens. The men would pay for a warm loaf. The freight road is right there, Jonas. He stared at her as if she had suggested selling the parlor stove plank by plank. You want my wife standing at the road bargaining with strangers? I want your wife keeping the bank from taking your barn. His jaw tightened. My mother did not stand in a yard selling onions. Your mother did not live 3 miles from 200 railroad men. She had dignity. Nora's hand went flat on the table. So did my father. He had a silk vest for every Sunday. He had a walnut parlor no one could sit in. He had a name people lowered their voices around, and when his accounts failed, dignity did not pay one creditor. It only taught my mother how to smile while the furniture left the house. Jonas said nothing. She leaned closer. I will not sit in a pretty room while this place goes under. His voice dropped. I brought you here to make a home people could respect, and I am telling you respect that cannot survive a shovel is not respect. It is decoration. He stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. No. The yard stays. I will not have the county saying Jonas Bell's wife sells supper scraps at the gate because he cannot provide. He left the kitchen. Nora sat alone with the cooling coffee, the hidden bills, and the freight road brightening in the window. Then she made her first business decision as Mrs. Bell. She waited until the next morning, when Jonas rode out to patch the north fence. Then she took a shovel from the barn. The first strike against the ornamental stone made a sound like a plate cracking. Nora froze. No one came. She dug again. The gravel was shallow, laid for eyes and not for weather. Beneath it the ground was dark, moist from the ditch seep, and alive with the smell of something waiting. She worked until her palms blistered. By noon, she had cleared the smallest curved bed. By late afternoon, she had turned it into a plain rectangle, no graceful shape, no show, only soil. She pressed onion sets into one row, beans into another, and a handful of chili seeds she had found in a jar behind the stove into the warmest corner, near the porch wall. When Jonas came home, the blue gazing ball lay on its side beside a pile of pale stones. The yard had one raw wound of earth in the middle of its polished face. He stopped at the gate. Nora stood behind the new row with dirt on her skirt. For a moment, he looked less angry than betrayed. You did it, he said. Yes. After I said no. Yes. His eyes moved from the overturned ground to the freight road, as if the road itself were already laughing. You have made me look like a man who cannot command his own house. No, Nora said. I have made us a row of onions. He walked past her into the house and shut the bedroom door. For 3 days he spoke only when necessary. Nora let him. A person who has worshipped a painted thing needs time to watch it fail. The onions came first, thin green hooks pushing up as if the ground had kept a secret and could not hold it any longer. The beans followed, then chiles, then squash, climbing where roses had sulked. Nora carried water before sunrise, cleared more stone after breakfast, and cooked supper in the evenings, without asking Jonas to approve what he had already lost the right to stop. On the 5th day, Mrs. Lottie Calder arrived in a 2-wheeled cart from the boarding house at Arroyo Switch. She was a widow with gray hair pinned under a man's old hat, and the confidence of someone who had saved herself before asking permission. I came to see the scandal, she said, climbing down. Nora wiped her hands on her apron, and Lottie surveyed the raw beds, the stone piles, the disgraced glass ball, and the furious little vegetable rows. Needs manure. Then she smiled. By sunset, Lottie had brought 2 sacks of compost from her stable, a bundle of cuttings, and more practical advice than Nora had received from any respectable woman in her life. Men will laugh until they smell profit, Lottie said. Then they will call it foresight, and claim they always favored it. She showed Nora how to lay a narrow irrigation runnel from the old ditch, how to plant sunflowers along the road to catch a traveler's eye, and how to turn the useless stone into a clean border that made the beds look intentional instead of desperate. "Pretty is not the enemy," Lottie said, tamping soil with her heel. "Pretty is bait, useful is the trap." 2 weeks later, the first railroad man stopped. He was a red-haired bridge carpenter named Will Keene, riding past with a canvas tool roll and a hunger. He did not bother hiding. He slowed at the gate, looked at the little painted board Nora had hung there, and read it aloud. "Fresh onions, beans soon, eggs when the hens repent." He laughed. Nora did not. "Onions are 2 bunches for a penny," he swung down. "Lady, I'd pay a penny to smell something that did not come from a frying pan of grease." He bought 4 bunches. Then he ate one raw at the gate, dirt still clinging to the end, and closed his eyes as if she had handed him summer itself. "You have more coming?" "Yes." "Bread?" "Not yet." "Make bread," he said, suddenly serious. "Camp bread could break a hammer. Make proper bread, and you will have men fighting in the road." The next day, 3 men stopped. By the end of the week, a camp cook rode down himself with a ledger in his pocket and suspicion in his face. He left with onions, eggs, 2 squash, a bundle of mint, and an agreement to come back every Tuesday if Nora could keep the rows alive. Jonas watched from behind the lace curtains. He still would not stand at the gate. When wagons slowed, he found work behind the barn. When men laughed, even with pleasure, his shoulders tightened. But at night, he saw the coins. Not many at first, pennies, nickels, a silver dime that Nora set apart just to look at, then flour traded for greens, a spool of wire for eggs, a sack of coffee beans bought without putting it on Cole's account. The yard began answering the bills in a language even Pride could understand. Nora used boards left from the unfinished barn roof to build a stand. It leaned at first, then Lottie's boarding house handyman came by, spat on both hands, and helped brace it square. Jonas saw it from the porch. "That board is warped," he said. Nora looked up. "Then fetch me a straight one," he frowned, as if she had tricked him into participating, but he fetched it. The next morning, without comment, he rehung the little sign higher on the gate, so riders could read it before they passed. After that, his surrender came in pieces. He repaired the ditch gate because wasted water is foolish. He dragged the pale stones into a half-circle by the road because wagons are rutting the yard. He brought home 2 laying hens from a man who owed him a favor because, if they keep asking for eggs, we might as well have eggs. He did not say business. Not yet. But one afternoon, when a mule team crushed the sunflower border, Jonas spent 3 hours building a proper pull-off. Beside the gate, Nora came out with a cup of water. He accepted it without looking at her. "The roadmen need somewhere to turn," he said. The roadmen, the customers. They both heard the word. Neither of them smiled until he turned away. By midsummer, the Bell yard no longer looked like a front yard. It looked like a living argument. Rows of beans, squash vines, onions drying on racks, chili plants bright with green fire, a small awning over the stand, a barrel of drinking water with a tin cup chained to it for travelers. The blue gazing ball had not been thrown away. Nora set it beside the compost heap, where it reflected chickens, mud, and the truth. Then came the bread. Nora had learned to bake after her father lost the servants, when the family still pretended the loss was temporary, and her mother called kitchen work practice. The skill had stayed in Nora's hands like a song she had been ashamed to know. She woke before dawn and made 4 loaves. They sold before noon. The next day she made 8. The day after that, 12. By the end of the month, the smell of her sourdough and onion bread reached the road before the house did. Railroad men began timing their errands around it. One crew sent a boy with a list and a canvas sack. Another brought back empty flour bags for wrapping. Lottie taught Nora how to feed a starter through heat, how to stretch dough without toughening it, and how to mark every sale in a ledger no man could dismiss as house money. Nora paid Cole's mercantile account in full on a Thursday. Mr. Ephraim Cole himself stood behind the counter, thin, lipped and smooth, haired, wearing a black vest too fine for a town that still smelled of mule dust. He counted the money slowly, then he counted it again. His eyes flicked to Nora's work. "Rough hands? Your husband send you?" "No," Cole smiled as if that answer explained too much. Newly married women often like to feel useful. Nora took the receipt from his fingers. Old merchants often like to feel necessary. The smile stayed. The eyes did not. That was the first time Ephraim Cole truly looked at her, not as a wife, not as a woman at a gate. As competition in August, a railroad supply agent named Mr. Rusk rode down from the upper camp after eating one of Nora's loaves. He walked the rows, tasted the chiles, opened 3 eggs against a tin plate and nodded at the yolks. Then he sat at the kitchen table and wrote a contract with his own pen. The Bell place would supply eggs, seasonal vegetables, and 36 loaves a week to 2 bridge camps through the end of grading season, payable each month. 36 loaves, 12 dozen eggs when possible. Fresh produce by weight. Nora read every line before signing. Jonas stood behind her chair, silent. When she dipped the pen, his hand came down lightly on the back of the chair, as if steadying himself. Rusk left a copy folded on the table. Jonas stared at it. "That is more money than the cattle brought last quarter." Nora blotted the ink. "Yes." He looked toward the parlor, where the lace curtains moved in the heat, then toward the kitchen, where flour dust floated like weather. "I was wrong about the yard." Nora waited. He swallowed. "But not done being wrong, maybe." "That is a start," she said. By September, Jonas had learned to be proud in a different direction. At the blacksmith, he mentioned that his wife's bread had more regular orders than half the town's stores. At the bank, he paid interest early and did not apologize for the flour on his sleeve. When a rancher joked that Bell had married a peddler, Jonas looked at him and said, "I married the only one of us smart enough to sell to hungry men." No one made that joke twice. The talk in town changed shape. At first, it had been whispered with lifted brows. "Have you heard Bell's wife tore up his front yard?" Then, it became practical. "Does she have eggs today then?" Urgent. "Get there before noon or the onion bread is gone." And finally admiring in the grudging way of places that resent being improved. The Bell place saw the railroad coming before the rest of us did. The parlor remained. Nora even put flowers in the jar sometimes, but she did the accounts on the small table beside the stove now, because that was where the work lived. The yard had stopped pretending. And because it had stopped pretending, the ranch was breathing again. That was when Ephraim Cole moved. He did not shout. Men like Cole rarely do. They prefer to act like weather, inevitable, polite, everywhere. He began by speaking in careful doubts. At the mercantile, while ranch wives chose thread and men waited for nails, he wondered aloud whether a young operation could meet a winter camp order when frost took the gardens. At the bank, he mentioned that baking for railroad crews required discipline, not just enthusiasm. At the hotel, where the railroad clerk took supper, Cole expressed concern that the company might be relying on a ranch kitchen with no proper bakery license, no warehouse, and no established supply account. He did not say Nora would fail. He said he hoped she would not. That was worse. A knife presented as concern enters deeper. Lottie brought the talk to Nora over coffee. He is talking to Allerton. Who is Allerton? Rusk's supervisor, the man who approves camp suppliers. Cole has sold dry goods to the railroad for 6 years. Nora looked toward the yard where Jonas was hanging peppers from the porch beam. Our contract is signed. Contracts are paper, Lottie said. Men like Cole know where paper can be folded. 3 days later, a letter arrived. It came from the regional office, not from Rusk. It praised the Bell operations, encouraging local initiative, which Nora immediately disliked. Then it stated that questions had been raised about the ranch's winter capacity. To maintain the contract, the Bell place would undergo a 30-day proof period, not 30. 6 loaves a week. 72. Not 2 camps. 4. Egg deliveries doubled. Vegetables maintained as available, though everyone knew the ground was cooling fast, and the late beans were already tired. Failure to meet the proof period would open the contract for transfer to an established supplier. Jonas read the letter standing by the stove. He read it once. Then again, by the 3rd reading, his face had gone still. Cole. Yes, Nora said. He knows we cannot make 72 loaves with 1 oven. He knows. He knows the hens cannot be persuaded by a letter. Yes. And the flour. That was the worst of it. The flour. Cole's mercantile controlled the depot orders. Every barrel of flour that came into Arroyo Switch passed through his account, unless a person could spare 4 days to haul from the mill downriver. They could not spare 4 days. Bread had to be baked twice a day already. Cole had not challenged Nora in the yard, where she had soil, hands, and customers. He had moved the fight into supply, where he owned the shelf. Jonas crushed the letter in one hand, then smoothed it again because paper still mattered. I will go see him. And say what? That he cannot do this. He will agree with you while doing it. Jonas sat down. For once, no pride stood between them, only arithmetic. 72 loaves meant flour by the barrel, wood by the cord, dough rising day and night, and hands they did not have. The next morning, Jonas went to buy flour. He came back with 2 barrels and a face white with rage. Cole had raised the price by nearly half. Freight trouble, Cole had said, smiling. There was no freight trouble. Only coal. They paid it because the proof period had begun. For 10 days Nora and Jonas worked inside the trap. Nora rose at 2, fed the starter. Mixed dough in wash tubs kneaded until her wrists burned, baked before sunrise, wrapped loaves, sold at the stand, started again before dark. Jonas cut wood, hauled water, delivered to camp, gathered eggs from every neighbor willing to trade, and coaxed the last green things from beds that had turned reluctant in the cold. Lottie sent 2 girls from the boarding house to help wrap. Nora paid them. She could not afford to. She could not afford not to. The numbers were cruel. They met the first week's quota, barely. But when Nora did the accounts, Cole's flour had eaten the profit out of every loaf. The second week, the hens slowed. A frost burned the bean vines. The chilies held on, but chilies were not bread. By the 15th day, Nora's hands cracked open across the knuckles. By the 18th, Jonas stopped shaving. By the 20th, Mr. Rusk came quietly after dusk. He would not come inside. He stood by the gate as if being seen at their table might cost him his position. Allerton already has transfer papers drafted, he said. Nora felt the yard tilt. Cole's name on them? Rusk nodded. He says he can fill the winter order through the mercantile, and guarantee flour besides. Jonas gave a bitter laugh. Because he has our flour. Rusk looked ashamed. I signed you because the camps eat better from your kitchen than from any company crate I have seen. But Allerton likes established men. Cole has spent years making himself look established. Nora looked toward the oven chimney, where smoke rose thin and tired. What happens if we miss one delivery? Review. And after review. Rusk did not answer. He did not have to. That night, Nora stayed at the table long after Jonas went outside to split wood. He was too exhausted to lift. She stared at the ledger until the numbers blurred. She had thought work could beat anything. Now she understood work could be harnessed against you. Cole had built a box from flour, time, and respectability. And like every good box, it did not need to insult the person trapped inside. It only had to remain closed. The bottom broke on the 23rd day. Jonas was hauling flour from the mercantile in a cold rain when the wagon wheel split near Dry Creek. One barrel rolled out, struck a stone, and burst. The rain got into it before Jonas could save more than a few sacks. The second barrel stayed whole. But the first was gone. Half a week's baking dissolved into paste in the road. There was no money for another barrel at Cole's price. No time for the downriver mill. No margin left in the ledger. When Jonas came home, his coat and hands were white with ruined flour. Nora stepped onto the porch. He could not meet her eyes. For one terrible moment, she saw the old Jonas return. The man who would rather look proper losing than dirty fighting. Then he set the broken barrel hoop down at her feet. "I am sorry," he said. "For the flour? For making you fight this long with one hand while I protected my pride with both." Nora could not answer. The cold had gone into her bones. She walked past him into the yard, where the first bed she had dug lay under a quilt against the frost. She sat down beside it in the mud. Jonas followed. He did not tell her to rise. He sat beside her in the wet yard, in the same place where the blue-gazing ball had once looked at the sky and done nothing. For a while they listened to the rain. "I tore up your front," Nora said. "You saved my ranch. I made us visible. You made us worth seeing. That is why he came." "Yes," she laughed once, without humor. "So if I had sat in the parlor, we would have been safe." "No," Jonas said. "We would have been quiet. That is different." He picked up a handful of mud and let it fall. "My mother kept a parlor so fine we were frightened to breathe in it. I thought that was the proof of a life held together. And now I think a room no one can work in is just a box with curtains." Nora looked at him. He was soaked, miserable, finally honest. "We cannot bake without flour," she said. "No. And Cole has the flour." Jonas stood. Rain ran from his hat brim. "Then we stopped needing his flour." It sounded impossible. So impossible that Nora almost told him not to dress to spare up his courage. But Lottie arrived before dawn with a shawl over her head, wet boots, and an idea burning in her face. "You have been buying flour from a shelf," she said without greeting. "Why?" Nora stared at her. "Because bread requires flour." "No. Bread requires grain ground small enough to use." Jonas straightened. Lottie set a folded scrap of paper on the table. "There is wheat at San Miguel Flats. Good hard winter wheat. 3 families. They sell it through a broker for almost nothing because Cole will not carry local grain. And old Mateo Vargas still has the stone mill on his irrigation ditch. Small, yes, slow, yes. But it turns." Nora felt the idea enter the room like sun under a door. "How far?" 6 miles past the South Ford. Jonas was already reaching for his coat. By first light, the 3 of them were on the wagon seat, crossing the wash through brown water and climbing toward the flats where the land opened wide and gold stubble shivered under winter sky. Mateo Vargas met them beside a low adobe millhouse half buried in cottonwoods. He was 70 if he was a day, with a white mustache, a wool vest, and suspicion in every line of his face. Lottie spoke first, then Nora spoke. Then Jonas did something he would not have done months earlier. He took off his hat and told the truth. We need grain ground. We can pay fair. Not coal fair. Fair. If we fail, coal takes the railroad contract, and every farmer here will keep selling cheap to a broker who sells back dear. Mateo said nothing. He led them inside. The mill smelled of damp stone, wheat dust, and old usefulness. A narrow water wheel turned from the ditch outside, slow but steady. The stones were worn but not dead. Cole told people this mill made coarse flour, Mateo said. Does it? For cakes, no. For hungry men, yes. For bread with bite, yes. For people not afraid of chewing, yes. Nora smiled for the first time in days. I am not afraid of chewing. By noon, they had spoken to all three families on San Miguel Flats. The Ortegas had wheat stacked under tarps. The Bowers had 2 sons strong enough to sack grain and turn stones when the water slowed. Mateo had the mill. Nora had orders. Jonas had a wagon, and Cole, for the first time, had nothing to say about any of it. The arithmetic changed so fast, Nora had to add it 3 times. Local wheat, milled at Mateo's ditch, cost less than half of Cole's flour. The farmers earned more than the broker paid. Mateo earned for grinding. The Bells could bake 72 loaves and make profit again. More than that, they could bake 100. The problem was no longer whether the work could be done. The problem was that they had 6 days to prove it. Lottie spread the word like fire through dry grass. Not with speeches, with lists. Who had hands? Who had pans? Who had spare wood? Who had eggs? Who had a wagon? Who had been overcharged by Ephraim Cole long enough to enjoy seeing him lose? By sundown, the answer seemed to be half the county. The mill ran through the night. Mateo watched the stones like a priest guarding an altar. The Bower boys loaded sacks until their shirts stuck to their backs. 2 women from the flats came to Nora's kitchen and kneaded without being asked twice. A camp carpenter repaired the broken wagon wheel and refused payment. Lottie took over wrapping and labeling at the parlor table, scattering crumbs over the braided rug Jonas had once feared to stain. Jonas built a second clay oven behind the house in one savage day, using river stones, barrel hoops, and every curse he had ever swallowed in front of Cole. By the second night, the Bell place no longer felt like a ranch. It felt like a country deciding where its money ought to go. Nora stood in the kitchen with flour up to her elbows, listening to voices in every room. Women laughing over dough, men splitting wood, children carrying egg baskets, Jonas outside calling for more kindling. Lottie in the parlor, ordering people like a general with a biscuit cutter, and beneath it all, the low, steady certainty of work that was no longer lonely. Cole had tried to isolate them. He had made the contest about whether one woman in one kitchen could be crushed by one man's shelf, but Nora's yard had been selling more than food all summer. It had been teaching people where to gather. On the 30th morning the first wagon rolled out before sunrise, then the second, then the third. The Bells did not creep into Arroyo Switch to ask for mercy. Rossi. They came in a line. Jonas drove the lead wagon. Nora sat beside him in the same blue traveling dress she had worn when she arrived. Though now the cuffs were mended, the hem was stained, and the woman inside it no longer looked like someone waiting to be placed in a room. Behind them came Lottie, Mateo Vargas, The Bower boys, 2 ranch wives with flour on their sleeves, 4 railroad men on their day off, and enough witnesses to make gossip useless. In the lead wagon were 104 loaves of bread, not soft white bread from Cole's Eastern flour, darker loaves, heavier loaves, loaves with a brown crust, a nutty smell, and a taste that made men stop talking after the first bite. There were eggs, crates of squash, onions, chili strings, pickled beans, jars of apple butter from Lottie's store, more than the proof period demanded. Enough to make the demand look small. Mr. Allerton was in the railroad office when Nora entered. So was Ephraim Cole. Cole had dressed for victory. Black coat, silver watch. Transfer papers already unfolded on the desk. He looked at Nora's dress first, then at her hands. Then past her, through the window, at the wagons filling the street. His smile changed shape but did not disappear. "Mrs. Bell," he said. "Quite a procession." Nora set the manifest on Allerton's desk. 104 loaves, 18 dozen eggs. Produce by weight listed here, preserves besides, all delivered within the proof period. Allerton adjusted his spectacles. The requested quota was 72 loaves. "Yes. This says 104. "Yes." Cole gave a soft laugh. "A heroic effort for 1 week does not prove winter capacity." Nora did not look at him. That was important. Men like Cole feed on being answered. She looked at Allerton. The flour came from local wheat at San Miguel Flats, ground at Mateo Vargas's mill. 3 farms have signed supply agreements. The mill can run daily. We have 2 ovens now and 4 paid helpers arranged by week. The winter order no longer depends on Mr. Cole's depot account. For the first time, Allerton looked interested instead of inconvenienced. "Local wheat?" Mateo appeared in the doorway then, hat in hand but spine straight. "My wheat," he said. "And ours," said Mrs. Ortega from behind him. "And our sons ground it," said Mrs. Bower. The office filled. Not with noise, with proof. Allerton came outside. He counted. He broke one of the darker loaves. Steam rose from the center. He tasted it. So did Rusk, who had been waiting near the steps, trying and failing not to smile. A bridge man in the road called out, "That is the bread, sir. That is the one keeps us from quitting." Laughter rolled down the street. Cole's jaw tightened. Allerton took another bite. Then he looked at the wagons, the farmers, the railroad men, the women with flour on their sleeves, the old miller who had been written off as obsolete, and the young ranch wife whose front yard had somehow become a supply chain. "It appears the capacity question is answered," Allerton said. Cole stepped forward. "With respect, Mr. Allerton, long association should matter. My company has supplied this line reliably for years. A ranch kitchen, no matter how spirited, is not an institution." Nora turned then. Only then. "You are right, Mr. Cole. A ranch kitchen is not an institution." She looked back at Allerton. "It is 5 farms, a working mill, 2 ovens, a paid crew, a freight road, and men who have already eaten the difference. If that is too small to be trusted, then perhaps the railroad has been buying from the wrong size of thing." No one laughed. That made it worse for Cole, because the sentence did not land as wit, it landed as math. Allerton folded the transfer papers once. Then again, he handed them back to Cole unsigned. "The Bell contract stands," he said. Cole's face did not redden. It paled. Allerton was not finished. "I will add the South Grading Camp for a trial month. If the local mill arrangement holds, we will discuss a longer regional supply." Nora felt Jonas beside her, perfectly still. Lottie made a sound like a cough that was not a cough. Mateo crossed himself. Cole looked at the unsigned papers in his hand. For years he had owned the shelf. He had thought that meant he owned the hunger, but hunger follows food. And food follows work. He left without raising his voice. That was the last mercy his pride had. The county remembered anyway. By evening, the Bell wagons returned empty. The railroad men had taken every loaf. Allerton had signed the expanded order. The farmers from San Miguel Flats rode home with money in their pockets and a reason to keep the mill turning, and Jonas drove slowly as if afraid speed might wake him from it. At the gate, he stopped the wagon. The yard lay before them in the low light. Rows covered against frost. Chilly strings under the eaves. 2 ovens cooling behind the house. The stand shut for the night. The parlor windows glowing. The road rutted from customers. The pale ornamental stones still edging the beds, no longer pretending to be wealth. Finally doing honest work, Jonas looked at Nora. My mother would have fainted at the sight of this yard. Nora smiled tiredly. Would she have recovered? She might have, once she saw the receipts. Then his face changed. The humor went. What remained was the apology that had started months earlier, and had only now found a door. I called it shame, he said. You called it ground. Nora waited. You were right. Rain began again, softer this time. Jonas looked toward the parlor. I wanted a room people would respect because I did not know how to build a life they could not deny. Nora took his hand. The room can stay. Yes, he said, but not as a cage. The next spring, no one in Arroyo Switch remembered the blue gazing ball except as a joke. The Bell front yard held no dead roses, no decorative gravel beds, no bench facing the road for callers who never came. It held long green rows from porch to gate. A painted stand with a real roof. A stone pull, off wide enough for 3 wagons. A chicken run, 2 clay ovens. A water barrel, a sign that read, Bell Yard bread, eggs, greens, and mill flour. Inside, the parlor was still neat. The lace curtains still hung. The braided rug had a permanent flour mark near one edge, and Jonas never tried to scrub it out. That was where Nora kept the account books now, on the little table he had once imagined holding coffee for callers. The ledger had changed. Cole's account was closed. The bank note was half paid. The barn roof was finished. The north fence was straight, and beneath the column where red ink used to gather like a wound, Nora had written one clean black line, profit held for spring planting. Jonas came in from the yard with soil on his boots, and a sack of newly ground wheat over one shoulder. He paused in the parlor doorway. Months earlier he had stood there unable to apologize. Now he did not need to. He crossed the room, set the sack beside Nora's chair, and opened the ledger to help her count. Outside, wagons were already slowing at the gate, and the front of the Bell house at last was doing what every respectable front should have done from the beginning. It was feeding the life behind it.